Do you want to hear a story about a bridge? Now, I don't want to talk about a bridge in terms of steel and concrete. I literally want to talk about a bridge from where we are to where we want to be. I want to talk about a bridge between the business community, our civic leaders, and the agencies that implement infrastructure. And more importantly, I want to talk about a bridge in the conversation, meaning transportation is not a road, it's not a rail, it's not a train, it's not a bus. It's an investment. And if we change the tone of our conversation and where we want to go, we are going to accomplish great, great things. So to begin to build that bridge, one of the things that we've done is through the partnership itself, we've developed a committee. And this committee consists of a lot of our local leaders, and I'll leave these names for you to read as we go through. The one thing that we've been doing, and this is an odd thing to say about a transportation project, is we are moving swiftly. Don alluded to things a little bit earlier about where we were. We got started a couple of months ago, and we're going to be done in a month. And when I'm done with my presentation, you'll appreciate the efforts of our committee, our local leadership, and more importantly, our consultant team and representatives in the partnership. Our mission as the committee is to help find effective and efficient pathways to capture and review plans and prioritize those so that we can come out with the next steps that we think are important to get behind as a business community. To test areas of consensus with our regional leaders, that includes this Council of Great Thinkers, and I will introduce them a little bit later, and to provide confidence and counsel to establish a task force in the partnership that will pick up these recommendations and actually carry them into implementation, which is very important. Some of the committee purposes include, and I promise you I will not read all of these, but I will highlight a couple of the key things, is to ensure sound and thorough due diligence, to brainstorm and sweep the over 240 transportation plans that are out there. 240, just pause and think about that, just in the region in and of itself. To provide a consistent script as we went out and interviewed our local leaders, to review and provide that counsel back. In other words, what we're doing is we're going out and listening, we're developing the talking points, and we're going to go back and double check to say, this is what we heard, right? And then we're going to bring that back into the partnership for guidance into the task force, which is the last piece that we're talking about doing. As we went out and we started to review the plans and started to put some things together, there was things that we had to consider. And those included understanding the depth of warehouse of data. Again, it is phenomenal. And quite frankly, as a transportation planner, it keeps me busy keeping up with all the activities that are going on in our community. This middle statement here is a very important one, is to understand this powerful call for C-suite leaders. It's the relationships of the agencies getting back into the business community to understand who, where, what, and why. Why are you locating somewhere? What are your needs from infrastructure, and how can we help you? That conversation goes on, but when that conversation gets elevated, projects like Sunrail get done. And many folks in this room understand how that worked with the relationships between elected folks, civic leaders, and the business community. That's power, and that's the power that the relationships we have in Central Florida can bring to bear. And then understand the perceptions of near-term construction projects as opposed to a regional strategy. A lot of the projects are already on the books. We don't need to worry about those. Those are going to happen. Let's think about the what's next. Let's think about how do we affect change for the future and not get caught up in the today. We took a look at over 240 elements in the regional transportation planning programs. I am not going to go through all of those, but I promise you when I gave the same presentation to the partnership board the other day, I had 7 slides of this level font that's going through and talking about a lot of the regional agencies that are out there and the types of things that we're looking at. But let me highlight a couple of things. When we talk about transportation, we're literally talking out of this world. We are talking about the hypermodal things that Don introduced earlier. We talk about how to get to and from work, but let's talk about the effects of infrastructure and what it means to jobs, what it means to attractiveness in our communities. Space is something that we have to pay attention to. Similar, there's lessons learned from the west coast of Florida. The Tampa Bay Area Regional Transportation Authority looked at a multi-county master plan and established goals and objectives therein. These are some lessons that we can learn and carry forward here. And then similar, what's going on, and this is sort of foreshadowing on a conversation I'm going to have in a couple of minutes, at the state level, what's happening with regional transportation planning and how these things are coming to fruition. When we completed the scan, we were hearing some commonalities in terms of thoughts and commitments coming back from a variety of the agencies. Again, I promise I'm not going to read these to you, but there are a couple of key words that start to highlight themselves out of this. We talk about the attractiveness of the region, the intermodality of all the things that we have, that our infrastructure is in good repair, but we do have bottlenecks that need to be addressed. Accessibility is very important. In that second one there, it's interesting when you read and start to think about what is our region, depending on what the mode is, that conversation changes. So if it's a bus, regional might be something on a little more local in terms of context, but when you talk about an airport, the region becomes global. Who are we marketing to? And then the tongue-in-cheek, when we talk about space, the region literally becomes out of this world. Access to all of these things are going to be important, not only to maintain the job accessibility, but to provide the infrastructure and the services needed to bring the freight and goods and all the logistics components therein. And then when you look at the connectivity and what we're hearing there, think regional transportation to provide access to areas not just in Central Florida, but points beyond, because we're all traveling a little bit farther. Time and distance is becoming a little bit shorter in terms of where we live, where we work, and where we play. These are all going to be founding principles of how we carry ourselves into the future. So when we completed the scan, there's certain things that we began to see as overlaps. Some of them passed that duh test, if you will. Clearly, we see Sunrail as something that will succeed. We know that, and we're going to completely be behind it to support it. Some other factors that start to come out of that through the scan of all the transportation plans include freight and goods movement and passenger movement on rail and multimodal activities. Congestion relief and capacity increase are always important in terms of providing infrastructure. Sustainability and environmental protection is always a founding principle when you talk about implementing different types of projects. Safety, always, always, always in a mission statement for any implementing transportation agency. And then how do we think a little bit differently in terms of providing complementary land uses around our infrastructure so that we're maximizing the capacity that we have available? I mentioned earlier the group of great thinkers. Again, I'm not going to read every single name that's associated with this group, but we have gone out and we have met with all of these leaders as part of our scan. So if you will, we looked at the plans, we looked at the websites, we developed the questions, we vetted that out with all of these leaders, and now we're in the process of getting all that organized so that we can go back out to them and say, again, we heard you, are we on target? So when we went out and met with the great thinkers, some of the things that we were bringing to them in terms of questions included, what matters most to regional competitiveness and growth? Do you need this group of great transportation thinkers, and what resources and supporting information, meetings, et cetera, need to occur along the way? How do we share, track, and measure what matters most? It's the old adage, if you don't measure it, it's not going to get done. What should we keep in mind as this transportation task force is formed? And then what are the areas where learning is in order? And learning is a very important component, because one of the things I always find is we do not, as a transportation industry, do a good job of making our products well known to folks. The easiest thing I always point to is people come to us and go, I want a train, I want a bus, I want a road. And the first question I will always ask back is why? Because they may not even completely understand what it is they want, why they need it, and where it would go, and maybe another solution would be better. So as we went out and we heard from this group of great thinkers, some of the things that we found were they're telling us engineering is the easiest part. That broke my heart. But the reality is, don't get caught up in the management of the production. Think about the leadership and the activities. And that's where it became important in terms of the feedback. And quite frankly, that's our roles as community leaders. Don't get caught up in what's programmed right now. That's going to happen. Think about the next. How are we going to look 5, 10, 15 years out and provide the funding needed to get those game changer projects in place? Where do we look at economic diversification, and how does multimodal activity support that in terms of supporting growth along the way? How do we integrate plans? Look at context and connectivity between all of the modes, between the business community needs and every other component that's out there. Don't think just simple transportation. Think of it in the entire fabric of the conversation. The potential we have in Central Florida, quite frankly, is ridiculous. We are at a nexus in terms of opportunity. How are we going to seize the moment and affect that change therein? And then this last one I mentioned a little bit earlier. What is the relationship of the infrastructure leaderships, i.e. secretaries, executive directors, into the C-suite folks in the business community? How do we build, how do we foster, and how do we maintain those relationships along the way are going to be key. So some of the things that we've learned and we're going to be building as we guide back into the task force is sort of built up on these particular building blocks. The needs now in emergencies, they're going to take care of themselves. It's important for us to be involved. It's important for us to recognize what they are and support them. But quite frankly, they're going to take care of themselves along the way. Similar, the current and near-term projects of influence, we want to monitor them. We want to support them, i.e. Sunrail, to carry them forward because we need to have success as building blocks as we move forward. Where we really need to think and start paying attention as to what's next. What is that tomorrow going to be? What are our next-gen regional projects and how do we define them? How do we support them? And how do we get them implemented? How do we look for diversification strategies of regional impact, cross-cutting beyond transportation into the business communities, into civic leadership, find where those successes can occur? And then lastly, let's look at that hypermodal vision. Don't be focused on a train, a plane, an automobile. Let's think connectivity, let's think mobility, and all of the things. And most important, how are we going to fund this? Because that is a fascinating, difficult conversation that's going to occur at the local, state, and national level. And through all of that, as I mentioned earlier, we want to measure the progress so that we can track where we are and benchmark it and identify where we're being successful. And we talk about learning, and actually that learning arrow should be up, down, in, out, in all different directions, because we really need to understand where we're going, what the conversation is, and how to be best educated along the way. Some of the things that we've learned along the way, there's a variety of promising priorities that already exist between Sunrail, the launch years to 7 years out, I-4 projects that are going on now, and there's a little one that's in the pipeline that will be starting next year. That's going to be a major $2 billion project. Port Canaveral, the diversity and the demand over there, it's phenomenal what's happening. Space Coast, I alluded to that a little bit earlier, their master planning process and the relationships to our region. The Orlando Airport, again, multimodal connectivity to the land uses around, all the planes, or all the trains and buses and everything that's coming into there. The hypermodal conversation again, and then the opportunity for Central Florida and its signature projects is going to literally boost the entire state in terms of its overall growth. I want to take a moment here. I mentioned some of the things that are going on with the statewide initiatives. There is a statewide corridor initiative, multimodal corridors in the area, one of which that affects us directly, and it basically follows the I-4 corridor. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, just to make sure that everybody understands that it's out there. It's looking at population growth, business growth, and all the different assets that are in the community, and looking at ways to better connect the existing and the emerging economic centers. So where do we go from here? We're in the process now of, as a committee, we're going to be wrapping up our report in the coming weeks, presenting it back to Mr. Stewart and his partnership. It's going to include the warehouse of plans and strategies and all the lessons learned along the way. We'll have vetted all of those conversations back out with the great thinkers, come back to the board in December, initiate our task force in the early parts of the next calendar year, and get this stuff rolling. So we have been active, we have been vocal, and you're going to see us in a couple of different places between now and the end of the calendar year as well. So that's my update.